I'm Michael Shifter. I'm president of the Inter-American Dialogue, and on behalf of the Dialogue and the Japan Association of Latin America and the Caribbean, and the Brazilian Center for International Relations, it's my great pleasure to extend a very warm welcome today to our esteemed panelists and our guests, and especially to those of you who are joining us either late at night in Japan or very early in the morning here in the US or elsewhere. Thank you so much for being with us. This public meeting follows and builds on 3 private roundtables held over the last month by the Dialogue and our partners to assess the prospects for enhanced Brazil, Japan, US trilateral collaboration in a range of different areas. This is a critical and timely topic as all countries today are looking to recover from the effects of the global pandemic. We'll explore today the opportunities at hand for greater collaboration. Through this meeting series, the Dialogue has been delighted to continue its now 6-year-long partnership with JALAC, aimed at highlighting developments in the long-standing Japan-Latin America relationship. We've held several meetings in Tokyo, one in Mexico City, and a few in Washington, D.C. We're also thrilled to be working closely this year with CEBRI, which we're fortunate to also partner with on other important events in different program areas. I want to take this opportunity to recognize and express my profound gratitude to Margaret Myers, the director of the Dialogue's very successful Asia and Latin America program, for her remarkable intellectual leadership and direction of this important effort. I want to thank Kate Blanchett as well for all of her assistance and support. Please allow me to also extend a huge thanks to our sponsors, Sumitomo Corporation, Toyota, Susho, and Mitsubishi Corporation for helping to make today's meeting and our entire meeting series a possibility. We're so grateful for your support. And I'm looking forward today to an excellent exchange and discussion on critical issues. Just a few housekeeping instructions before we get started. All of our panelists will be speaking in English, but we are also offering Portuguese and Japanese interpretation for the audience. You can change your language by clicking the interpretation icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen. From there, you can choose between Portuguese, Japanese, or the original audio. You are welcome to submit questions at any time during the event through the Q&A feature in Zoom or by emailing meetings@thedialogue.org. Before we turn to our outstanding panel of very distinguished experts, I would like to invite Ambassador André Correa do Lago, Brazil's current ambassador to India and the former ambassador to Japan, to offer a brief welcome on behalf of the Brazilian Center for International Relations. Ambassador Lago, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Michael. It's a great pleasure as a member of CEBRI's International Advisory Board to welcome you all to this wonderful cooperation between 3 great institutions. I'm extremely glad to see this panel conclude the series of meetings that you mentioned, Michael, having a representative of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Japan, Teiji Hayashi, a representative of the US State Department, Julie Chung, and of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ambassador Marcia Dona Abreu, with whom I had the pleasure to work in Washington, D.C. a few years ago when we were counselors, something like that. I'm very glad too that we have Tatiana Prazeres and Keisuke Nakamura as experts in economic affairs that can debate with us this very positive perspectives that we all see of the cooperation between our 3 countries. And finally, I'm very glad to share, I'm opening as a former ambassador of Brazil to Japan, and the closing will be by a former ambassador of Japan in Brazil, Ambassador Sato, a dear friend. So I think this is a really balanced, interesting, and exciting panel that will really open, I believe, a wider discussion about what US, Japan, and Brazil can do together. So it's really great to be able to be here today. And I know with the numerous public and watch this debate. Thank you very much.
Many thanks to you, Ambassador Lago, for those excellent comments. And now we'll begin our panel. And let me just, Ambassador Lago went through some of the names, but let me just, if I could, please give just formal introductions. And let me indicate that all of our speakers really have truly impressive backgrounds, and their full bios can be found on our Dialogue website. Let me introduce them very briefly now in the order in which they'll speak so we can get started with our panel. Teiji Hayashi is the Assistant Minister for Latin America and Caribbean Affairs at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Japan. We're very welcome to welcome him. Marcia Dona Abreu, who was just mentioned by Ambassador Lago, is Brazil's Secretary for Bilateral Negotiations in Asia, the Pacific, and Russia. And we're very happy to welcome the ambassador. Julie Chung is the Acting Assistant Secretary for Western Hemisphere Affairs at the US State Department. And Julie has participated in a number of dialogue events, and we're really delighted to have her with us this morning and taking time out of her schedule. Tatiana Praceres will then follow, and Tatiana is a senior fellow at the University of International Business and Economics, the former senior advisor to the Director General of the World Trade Organization. Welcome, Tatiana, for being with us. And finally, we have our good friend, Kazuki Nakamura, who is the representative of the Inter-American Development Bank's Asia office in Tokyo. So as you can tell, we have a first trade panel, and without further ado, let me turn it over to Mr. Hayashi for his intervention.
Well, thank you. Good evening and good morning, everyone. And first, I thank you, Mr. Michael Schifter, for your warm welcome. I would also like to express my gratitude to Margaret, who has very nicely organized this series of events. We are here at a time when the partnership of three countries, Japan, the US, and Brazil, is stronger than it's ever been. The trilateral dialogue launched last November, which we call JUSBE, Japan, US, Brazil dialogue, brings a new political dimension to our partnership and commitment. My remarks today will first touch upon the launch of JUSBE, which in fact was a Japanese proposal. I physically participated in the launching meeting or inaugural meeting held in Brasilia in November of last year, despite some worrisome voice of my travel amidst pandemic to Brazil. Secondly, I will give my preliminary thought on the potential areas of cooperation where the JUSBE can add value to. The history of JUSBE 2019 was a special year for Japan-Brazil relations. In January 2019, President Bolsonaro took office, and Japan's Prime Minister at that moment, Abe, met him 3 times in that year. These 3 encounters in the same year were remarkable, not only in terms of its number, but also in terms of their substance. Both leaders got on well personally and committed to strengthening our strategic partnership based on the shared fundamental values and principles, both bilaterally and multilaterally. US-Brazil relations were also strengthened during the same period. Of course, President Bolsonaro and President Trump fostered good personal relations, but at least from the Japanese perspective, they also yielded tangible outcome in various areas. For instance, the US decided to support the Brazil's accession to the OECD. And in return, Brazil decided to forego the special and differential treatment for developing countries in the WTO. Bilateral agreement accorded last December on transparency, trade facilitation, and anti-corruption are also good examples. Today, we do not regard Brazil as we have seen in the past. Brazil used to be a leader of developing country like G77 and a tough negotiator representing specific groups like Cairns Group in the Doha round. But today, Brazil is assuming more global and regional responsibility and is closely aligning its foreign policy with countries such as Japan and the US to bring forward a common interest of the international community. Against this backdrop, the idea of JUSBE was born. It is peak time to strengthen our cooperation and to promote common values and interests systematically through a trilateral dialogue. Our purpose is to make this dialogue a sustainable forum that is not affected by political circumstances or change of leaders in one of the three countries. We are of the view that the three countries have a solid common basis to share the values and principles, such as democracy, freedom, and the rule of law, and our commitment to a free and open international order will lead to the peace and prosperity of the international community. The three pillars identified in JUSBE, namely, 1, regional issues, 2nd, economic prosperity, and 3rd, democratic governance, are carefully elaborated along this line of thought. We believe such areas are appropriate to showcase our advantages to promote common interest. Furthermore, I need to highlight that the trilateral dialogue among Japan, the US, and Brazil is not just for the government, but also for academia and the private sector. These non-governmental sectors will play an important role in achieving a free and open international order. In this regard, I'd like to commend the organizers of the event, CEBRI, Inter-American Dialogue, and the Japan Association of Latin America and the Caribbean for providing this opportunity to have an in-depth discussion on our trilateral cooperation. Then I'd like to proceed to the second item, potential areas of JUSBE cooperation, which could be at least 2 areas from my perspective. The first is in 5G, which fit well under one of the 3 pillars, economic prosperity. Today, Brazil is moving into an important stage of its 5G auction. With a vision to build a secure and clean 5G network, Japan is promoting a 5G architecture model called Open RAN. This model is open yet secure, using sub-components from a variety of vendors. It is a model that allows telecom operators to build an ideal 5G network, taking advantage of the strengths of each suppliers, while avoiding excessive dependency on a single supplier. Japanese companies such as NEC and Fujitsu, which have successfully run businesses in Brazil for many years, are ready to contribute to the construction of Open RAN model in Brazil. I'm aware that the US is also promoting the same Open RAN model, and Brazil is a front runner to spread the 5G network in Latin America. Under this circumstance, JUSBE will be a sustainable platform where we can promote a clean and secure network in the region. The second area of our cooperation is in environmental issues. Today, we are faced with drastic policy challenges in this area, climate change. Last year, Japanese Prime Minister Suga declared that Japan is aiming to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. President Biden decided to return to the Paris Agreement on his inauguration day. The deforestation issue in Amazonia seems to become a main obstacle to the signing of the EU-Mercosur FTA. In addition, green is becoming one of the key words in many countries to ensure economic recovery after overcoming COVID-19. Having in mind this new paradigm shift, we believe that JUSBE is a good platform where three countries can enhance cooperation in this area as global leaders. Japan and Brazil has a long and successful record of cooperation in this area. For example, we have been co-hosting multilateral informal annual conferences on climate change since 2002. And this year's edition was successfully held earlier this month. The same success goes for bilateral cooperation. Japan has been concluding a number of projects to conserve the Amazon rainforest. When the fire in Amazon outbreak occurred 2 years ago, Japan immediately provided fire prevention equipment. In the long run, Japan has been cooperating to monitor and forecast forest losses using Japanese satellite images since 2000. We believe that striking a balance between environmental conservation and economic and social development is fundamental. During the visit of Foreign Minister Motegi last January, Japan and Brazil signed a memorandum on biodiversity cooperation, as well as on natural resources to achieve this goal. Japan will also support the development of sustainable agriculture in Brazil, such as smart agriculture using AI, artificial intelligence, to minimize the use of chemicals and fuels. It is reported that Prime Minister Suga is visiting Washington, D.C. next month, and I suppose the environment will be one of the issues to be discussed in the meeting with President Joe Biden. President Biden himself is hosting a virtual summit on climate change on April 22nd. With this background and the sequence, we consider it is appropriate time to deepen trilateral cooperation among Japan, Brazil, and the US in regard to the environment, particularly on climate change issues. Last but not least, I'd like to comment on the view about the nature of JUSBE raised in the previous informal discussions. One of the participants argued that JUSBE is a framework established by a specific administration for a specific political reason. And as a result, it will be conducive to geopolitical confrontation and to politicizing some issues. As a proponent of JUSBE, I want to make it clear that JUSBE should be a long-standing and sustainable forum among three members that share common values like a free and open international order. These common values we share will be a long-standing and unaffected by the political position of each country's administration. In my opening remark, I briefly described two issues. One, the first, the launch of the JUSBE, and the second, the potential areas of further trilateral cooperation, digital and green. I'll stop here, and I'd like to thank again Mr. Shifter for giving me this opportunity. And I'm looking forward to hearing from further comment and questions from other panelists and participants. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Assistant Minister Hayashi. Those were excellent remarks, extremely helpful and extremely clear. And I'm sure there's going to be a lot of discussion about the points you made. Now it's a great pleasure to turn the floor to Ambassador Dona Abreu from Brazil for her comments. Ambassador?
Hey, thank you, Michael. Thanks to you, to Margaret, to the Dialogue for having me organizing this session. This will give us a great opportunity to discuss avenues for engagement and cooperation between Brazil, Japan, and the United States. Also, hello to my good friends here, Andre, Tassiana, long time no see you, Julie, just talked to you last week. And hello also to Ambassador Sato and to Nakamura. I will start referring to something that Teiji Hayashi has already mentioned, the launching of JUSBE last November. Of course, he was there. Julie was here too in Brazil. We had a fruitful meeting that was the inauguration of a process that, like Teiji Hayashi says, we want to see fructify and continue along the years as a platform for further engagement between our three countries. We share very long relationships, almost 200 years with the United States, 126 years with Japan, many good endeavors that we were able to conduct together. Now, based of course, in the values that Hayashi mentioned, our promotion of fundamental freedoms, rule of law, market economies, democratic governance. The fact that there is a new administration in the US, of course, raises the question, are we going to be able to continue with this dialogue? And the good thing and the first message that I bring here today is, from the perspective of Brazil, of course, we are ready, willing to continue engaging. And a good news is that our bosses, Minister Naújo, Minister Matagi, Secretary Blinken, engaged very early on the Biden administration. They talked. So I hope that it's just a matter of time and some high-level confirmations in the Department of State that we can have our first or our second JUSBE meeting scheduled at whatever level it is seem fit. Now, we need an agenda for that, and I'm happy Hayashi raised already his points. JUSBE was never intended to be a talk shop. It was from the beginning conceived as a platform for concrete deliverables for our three countries and in the interest of the three pillars: regional cooperation, prosperity, common prosperity, sustainable prosperity, and of course, promotion of democracy. So let me share with you my views about the priorities that we could have for this new engagement. Priority number one today would be health and economic recovery from the brutal challenges brought about by the COVID pandemics. This, for a country like Brazil, means first and foremost vaccines. Vaccines for all, vaccines now, vaccines in the future. I understand we are already engaging bilaterally with the United States to try to get some spare doses of vaccines. We are trying to expedite orders elsewhere. Andre is part of this effort, and he knows that, because we have a particularly aggressive variant of the virus, but I will not delve on that. What I think our three countries can do is that we can work together on areas such as identifying idle manufacturing capacity, encouraging voluntary licensing, as we are seeing already happening with many facilities around the world, expedite transfer of technology to institutions that can produce locally. For instance, in Brazil, we are already producing at least 3 vaccines, aiming to perhaps increase the number of local production here. We can work trilaterally on that. We can work at the WTO. I understand the new DG has already spelled out her sense of priority on this area as well. We can work in COVAX. Julie was mentioning that when we talked last week. So I do say this is an area where we should work together at this point. Now, on the economic front, JUSBE at its initial launching event has spelled in some detail the need for more resilient supply chains. And we can work on that too. I see a number of promising areas, and most of these areas connect very directly with our sustainability concerns. Hayashi referred to that too. So I would see sustainability to me offers at least 3 pronged possibilities. One is cooperation on Amazon deforestation and climate change. And we have the climate summit President Biden is convening later in April this year. We are going to be there. We are already working with our American partners, already working with ideas to promote over there. The second vector is sustainable energy. I don't need to expand on that. Brazil is a big producer in that area. 83% of our electric grid is from renewable sources. 45% of our energy matrix is from renewable sources. We can work on that. A third factor is sustainable resilient infrastructure. Japan has put forward some time ago its concept of quality infrastructure. We have the Blue Dot Network, America Cresce, Brazil's investment partnership program, number of opportunities in that area. As major investors in Brazil, both Japan and the United States can derive benefits to from improved backbone infrastructure in my country, both the physical infrastructure and the backbone services that are crucial to economic activity today. The last one would be connectivity. I think Hayashi explored in some detail the element of the open RAN architecture. He also mentioned that Brazil is going to have the spectrum auction of 5G probably mid-July this year. I think we could and should work on architectures for safe, secure, interoperable 5G infrastructure in Brazil, together with our partners from Japan, the US. We just had a mission sent to Japan to talk about and discuss these elements of the urban architecture. I'm discussing it here. Our experts are talking about that as well. So, and I understand, last not least, that the US Development Finance Corporation can engage in some sort of financing and support for 5G infrastructure. Now, also cybersecurity would be a concern. I don't want to overstep my time allowance. So I think I would stop here in the interest of time, and hopefully I will hear more from the other partners on these ideas. Curious to have and curious to listen to you, and thanks for the opportunity. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. That's a very, very interesting perspective and great set of ideas, and I'm sure we'll have a lot of questions and good discussion, but really appreciate that. With that, let me turn it over now to Acting Assistant Secretary Chung from the State Department for the US perspective.
Great. Thank you, Michael. And it's a pleasure to join all of you today to speak about the growing trilateral cooperation among Brazil, Japan, and the United States. Our three countries in our world right now face unprecedented challenges, we've just talked about. But by working together, we believe we can reaffirm our shared values and confront these challenges jointly. Separately, we are strong. Together, we are even stronger. And we really believe in the United States that we can be force multipliers for each other. So I was really excited to be a part of the launch of the JUSBE from the start. And it's great to have Ambassador Teiji Hayashi and Ambassador Marcia Donor on today in our virtual stage. And as the three of us launched it in Brasilia last November, which just seems like it was just yesterday. And a sincere thank you to the Inter-American Dialogues, Michael Shifter and Margaret Myers for bringing us together into this platform. Now, as you heard, we launched this trilateral exchange as a way to work closely together to advance our shared values. Why? I think it makes perfect sense. Why these three countries, with everything that we do in our immediate region, but what we can do globally and regionally together. So it really builds upon the three countries' traditional ties based on a common commitment to human rights, democracy, and the rule of law. And we collectively aspire to a free and open rules-based international order. Now, our shared values are particularly important at this time of the global crisis of the pandemic, as we strive to keep our citizens healthy, jumpstart the economy, and confront the existential threat of global climate change, and defend democratic ideals that form the foundation of each of our three countries and our global order. So in our November meeting, you heard about the three pillars that we created. And the Biden-Harris administration has affirmed that our trilateral partnership with Japan and Brazil continues to be a priority. And JUSBE really provides that flexible and effective framework to respond collectively to evolving mutual challenges and trilaterally advance our shared goals. Now, within the very first few months as Secretary of State, Secretary Blinken held a very positive, productive call to his Brazilian counterpart, Foreign Minister Ernesto Araujo, and we underscored the importance we place on continued collaboration and partnership with Brazil. And as you saw just last week, the Secretary met in Tokyo with Japanese Foreign Minister Toshimitsu Motegi, and also reaffirmed the vital importance of the US-Japan alliance to promote peace, security, and prosperity in the Indo-Pacific region. And if you look at the statements of the US-Japan gathering last week, we really talk a lot about the international order and the rules-based system. The United States is committed to this continued trilateral exchange mechanism. And as we weave through these three pillars, and among those collective efforts to respond to the pandemic and its economic impacts, climate change, and democracy, as we face this in a new world today. Now, no doubt on COVID, the health and economic impacts has really been felt globally, and we're pursuing new energy into global collaboration in the health and economic recovery. Our countries obviously have suffered from devastating effects. And in our November meeting, we affirmed our trilateral commitment to work together towards overcoming the crisis, but also shaping a new trajectory post-COVID-19. And this global cooperation is really crucial to meet the threats of our time. And as the new administration has reaffirmed the United States is back in multilateral fora, we rejoined the World Health Organization and really promoted a collective action towards these kinds of issues. And of course, with our $2 billion to Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance in support of COVAX, and really promoting that safe and effective vaccines for 92 low and middle income economies. We will also take a leadership role in galvanizing global contributions to COVAX and provide an additional $2 billion in 2022. And of course, it's not just about COVID-19. We're building on decades of US investments in global health organizations, global health strengthening systems. And this demonstrates the Biden-Harris administration's commitment to build back better by strengthening our multilateral cooperation. So we really want to encourage other countries to make and fulfill these commitments to COVAX, but we need to think about the post-COVID world and the next pandemic, hopefully not, but the next health challenges that we can address together. Now, we also remain focused on working on the economic recovery angle. We're very committed to counting on the innovative and robust private sectors in each of our countries to help drive this recovery. And first, supply chains. Hayashi-san mentioned the supply chains, and also Marcia Donner, the increased interconnection among our number of our sectors. And the US and Brazil already have a robust value-added trade, and as trilateral partners, we can further develop our business-to-business ties. And the United States and Japan have discussed with Brazil strengthening our supply chains to make the world's industry more resilient to the supply shocks. As you've heard before from the other two speakers, 5G infrastructure. This is about the development of 5G that's open, interoperable, reliable, secure. The stakes for this, for ensuring a secure and safe 5G is enormous. And it's going to be transformative in our world as it touches every aspect of our lives, whether it's financial services, electrical distribution, healthcare, public health, and much more. So our continued development and investment in these sectors will accelerate our collective progress, also toward a clean energy transition and reaching our climate goals. Now in climate, the Biden-Harris administration has been unequivocal in committing the United States to combating this climate crisis. And the President, Secretary Blinken, and Special Envoy Kerry are all very focused on advancing action at home and abroad to reach that net zero emissions globally by mid-century. So this will require even more ambitious commitments from everybody. And both Japan and Brazil, of course, are invited to the US-hosted Virtual Leaders Summit on Climate on Earth Day, April 22nd. So we'll be tackling the climate crisis together that requires these ambitious partnerships. And our focus on climate offers new opportunities just for our trilateral JUSBE mechanism, not only on clean energy transition, but also on technical exchanges and innovative solutions, such as forest conservation and adapting agriculture to reduce deforestation, as well as greenhouse gas emissions. So our large economies, our robust private sectors will definitely have a role as we face these challenges together. And last, on the democracy front, democracy, open and transparent governance, protection of fundamental freedoms. This is a perfect forum to discuss collectively how to strengthen these institutions. And given our COVID-19 challenges, a top priority is addressing the social and economic disparities that were really magnified during the pandemic. We saw uneven impacts on social and economic inclusions across our populations, and free peoples trade with one another and work together to really address that. Even here in the Western Hemisphere, we've seen corruption and dictatorship endanger that prosperity and security. Now, all three of our countries have said we stand for democracy in Venezuela, for example, with interim President Juan Guaido. And we're working with international organizations and civil society to support the Venezuelan people, including the more than 261,000 Venezuelans who are in Brazil now. Now, on a global scale, we also want to commit to multilateral diplomacy to leverage our trilateral partnership in areas like maritime cooperation, illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing, and also talk about human rights more broadly as we seek that international social, labor, and environmental standards that foster inclusion and opportunities for all. So our like-minded allies will be so important as we engage on these issues together. So I'll stop there and welcome questions and a robust dialogue today. Again, thank you for the Inter-American Dialogue for putting this together.
Thank you so much, Julie. Those excellent comments, very, very helpful, and really a very important perspective from the new administration. For another view on these issues, it's a pleasure now to give the floor to Tatiana Praceres.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Good morning, good evening. Thanks to the three co-hosts for the invitation. It's a pleasure to participate in this session. Actually, it's an honor to join this distinguished panel. Let me jump straight to the issue here. I believe the JUSBE can be a positive initiative as it evolves into a platform for collaboration around a constructive agenda. And that sounds like platitude, but please bear with me. I think as a platform, as a tool, JUSBE is as good or as bad as the purpose that participants attribute to it. And I must say that in my sense, the elephant in the room here is China. Now, I'm speaking from China, where I live and work, but I'm obviously a Brazilian national, a former senior official in Brazil, and I obviously care about Brazil. My view is that JUSBE should not be an anti-China exercise. And obviously no one is advocating for that here, but it may well be part of the rationale for some stakeholders. I think the objective for US, Japan, and Brazil should be to develop a positive, constructive agenda, and these are the operational words, has to be positive and constructive. I think it would not be in Brazil's best diplomatic tradition to build a coalition to isolate or to corner the country. I think Brazil has a sound record of building bridges to foster convergence, to foster collaboration in an inclusive manner. Also, if JUSBE is to retain its relevance beyond political cycles in Brazil, and I really hope it does, JUSBE should not be seen as an anti-China dialogue, of course. Otherwise, it may well fade before it flourishes. So I think maybe that is a bit different in the US and in Brazil, in the US and in Japan. But in Brazil, I think this is something important to highlight. And that is, of course, my very personal view on this. So in practice, how this positive, constructive collaboration could take place. And I'm very pleased to see some very good suggestions and ideas from previous speakers. So I'm very confident that this will be a constructive and positive collaboration. Then in addition to health and climate issues that have been mentioned, let me just mention two concrete opportunities that I see for the three countries to work together. And that relates to collaboration in the WTO and in the OECD. So WTO very quickly. The US, Japan, and Brazil are part of a very small group of influential WTO members. They're very influential indeed. I watched firsthand diplomats from these three countries in action, including Ambassador Macedone. And I'm confident that the WTO needs their engagement, and the three countries stand to benefit from a stronger WTO. So the three countries have recently submitted a joint proposal on a very relevant topic, raising very legitimate concerns, but that was widely seen as an anti-China proposal. It is obviously not a problem for the three to submit a proposal focused on SOEs, on state-owned enterprises or industrial subsidies. I think these issues related to leveling the playing field are very important, very legitimate. But I would also encourage the three players to build on this coordination effort within the WTO and go further, looking at a broader set of issues. E-commerce or fishery subsidies, as has been mentioned, are obvious candidates here. Solving the appellate body crisis is another one. So it would be great to see the three countries working together, taking advantage of this coordination exercise, and work also with other members in a broader set of topics as well. Briefly on the OECD. Of course, Brazil has started its succession journey to the OECD. The US and Japan are obviously part of the club. And in my view, the three stand to gain from Brazil joining the club, joining the group. Japan has always supported Brazil's accession process. Until 2019, I think Japan was coordinating a group of ambassadors trying to facilitate consensus around the package of accessions, of candidacies, including the one from Brazil. But I understand that accessions have lost momentum with COVID, with the US elections, and then the selection for the new OECD Secretary General, which was just concluded. So maybe accession efforts can be stepped up now, and maybe Japan could resume its previous role, I don't know. But I think this is something positive, concrete, where the three countries could further cooperate. And more than that, I think Brazil's accession could be an enabler for future trilateral work in the context of the OECD. So the accession would not be an end in itself, but it opens new pathways for collaboration. To conclude, JUSBE can indeed become a relevant, a useful mechanism, but that requires members to focus on what they can build together. And I'm very pleased to hear very concrete suggestions in that regard. It should not be a platform to oppose any given country. I think rather JUSBE should focus on what the three can do together, benefiting themselves and the international community as a whole. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Praceres, for very interesting and important perspective on this issue. And before I turn it over to our final speaker, Mr. Nakamura, I do want to remind all of our participants that they're welcome to submit questions through the Q&A function on Zoom, and also send an email if they prefer to meetings@thedialogue.org. And we welcome any comments and questions that our participants might have. And with that, it's a great pleasure to turn the floor over to Mr. Nakamura.
Thank you very much for kind introduction, Mr. Sifter. I'd like to talk 3 points about Brazil, Japan, and United States cooperation tonight. Well, this morning. Cooperation framework, global challenges, and role of international organizations. I will start with cooperation framework. It is a complex process and takes time to achieve an effective cooperation if Brazil, Japan, and United States continue working with the conventional framework based upon bilateral relations. Trilateral cooperation is workable when the sum of benefits which each party receives from trilateral cooperation is greater than benefits produced by bilateral cooperation. For instance, the sum of Brazil's benefit and Japan's benefit should be greater than the benefit of Brazil-Japan bilateral cooperation, and so as Brazil-US and US-Japan. So when we talk about trilateral cooperation for addressing global challenges, its framework should be based on shared common good instead of the framework of extended bilateral cooperation relations. Since Brazil, Japan, and the United States share common values such as democracy, free and open market, and rule of law, the three countries must work together to lead efforts to address pressing global issues for putting forward a free and open international order of the post-COVID-19 era under the cooperation framework based on the shared common good. Now, I find 3 pressing global issues which Brazil, Japan, and the United States are well positioned to work together and will bring strong impact. First, food security and safety. The 3 countries make joint efforts to promote innovation in agricultural technologies, affordable, especially for small farmers. Small farmers make up more than 80% of all agricultural operations, and small family farm sector produces more than 70% of food consumed in Brazil. Japan and the US cooperate with Brazil to offer affordable, smart, and sustainable agricultural technologies, especially for small farmers to increase their productivity. In addition, Brazil, Japan, and US work together to transform food value chain into smarter and sustainable. Second, as all panelists mentioned, is climate change. Needless to say, individual action of Brazil, Japan, and US has impact to climate change. Yet the synergy between the three countries will bring more impacts than the sum of individual actions. With regard to the climate actions, Brazil and Japan and the United States can work together, I think, two areas. First, carbon neutral society. The three countries collaborate to create innovations in technologies of producing and using carbon neutral fuels. For instance, US is the world's largest and Brazil is the second largest producer of ethanol. Combined, Brazil and the United States, they produce more than 80% of world ethanol production. While Japan is one of the largest consumers of fossil fuels. They can work together to develop new technologies of producing and using greener ethanol. The second, again, it's everyone talks about the sustainable development of the Amazon region. The Amazon region is a vast area with unique system of high socio-environmental complexity and influences greatly the global climate. Japan and the US collaborate with Brazil for sustainable development and conservation of the Amazon region. And third pressing issues is digital society. Digital technologies are changing our society more rapidly than any innovation in our history. At the same time, digital divide, the gap between individuals, households, businesses, and geographic areas at the different socioeconomic levels in terms of access to technologies has been widening. Brazil and Japan and US work together to build open, safe, and inclusive digital society. The three countries can collaborate to develop quality infrastructure for digital society. For example, high-speed broadband and advanced ICT networks such as 5G and space satellite. Harmonization and capacity building of digital regulations such as cybersecurity, data privacy, and data market. Also to promote innovations in digital technologies and services affordable for low-income and poor population. Lastly, I would like to talk about the role of international organizations, especially multilateral development banks, such as Inter-American Development Bank. I have no doubt that Brazil, Japan, and US will be able to achieve effective cooperation to address pressing global issues through continuous strategic dialogues. However, the cooperation could be more effective if the three countries make good use of multilateral development banks, international organizations. They can offer technical expertise, knowledge, and financial resources to address global challenges such as climate change and digital society. A platform for including international organizations already exists because they are working closely with bilateral financial and technical cooperation institutions of the three countries. I believe that Brazil, Japan, US working together with international organizations should and could lead a free and open international order of the post-COVID-19 era by leading the efforts to address pressing global issues. I stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Nakamura, for this excellent contribution to the debate and discussion. extremely helpful. And we do have a few questions coming in, but we have, just a reminder, we have almost 300 people on the call and would welcome more questions. We have about 20-25 minutes for those, for some discussion. I would like to start with one question and perhaps direct it to our friend, to our friend, Mr. Hayashi, who our first speaker, is a question about the possibilities of Japanese government interest, given the abundance of technology and labor, land resources in Brazil for assistance and development of rubber plantations. Is there any consideration of that? Is that seen as sort of a potential area of some opportunity?
So your question is related to the rubber plantation of farmers.
Yes.
And how we can help them?
Yes,
or how
the Japanese government is interested in promoting rubber and other planting in Brazil, given the abundance of technology, labor, and land cultivation.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we have already a long history to help the farmers in the rainforest or in Amazonia. And we are promoting a kind of sustainable agriculture using some technologies. Well, as I mentioned, we are looking for some sustainable manner to develop these small farmers in that areas. In more concrete terms, well, our expert is also, well, already they are teaching some method to reduce the use of, for example, chemical product and keep some, for example, the ecosystems in Amazonia help, well, at the same time, realizing some, well, the economic development or growth in that areas. For example, they advise not to cut all the rainforest, but they keep some farms, keeping some distance, and in between they keep the rainforest, for example. So that is one of the example we have in a technical cooperation to help, for example, rubber farmers in Brazil.
Great, thank you very much. We have another question from Mr. Marcos de Paiva Vieira, who notes Dr. Praceres' mention of China as a key player that's relevant to today's topic. And the question he poses is, how could the three countries take advantage of having a new Director General at the World Trade Organization in order to seek solutions that are best for all, including China? And who wants to take that one?
Yeah, maybe I could.
Praceres, you want to start us out?
Comments? Yeah. Let me say that I think it was very positive that the Biden-Harris administration unblocked the selection process of the new Director General of the WTO. Director General is a very important position for the future of the organization. Formally, he or she may not hold a lot of power, but in practice, if members want to get anything done, they need a very good Director General. So I'm very pleased that WTO has Dr. Ngozi as their new DG. And I think, well, the three countries, the US, Japan, and Brazil can work together to try to advance the reform of the WTO. And that, of course, relates not only, but also to China. I think some observers are a bit skeptical about the future of the WTO. How is that the WTO can, under the same roof, have countries with economic models so different as China and others, right? I'm not that negative, that skeptical about it, but I understand that a lot of work is needed, and I do believe that the issues raised by Japan, US, and Brazil are very relevant, will be central for the future of the WTO, and I hope there is engagement now around this and other issues. So I think the Director General, acting behind the scenes, can play a very positive role in steering the membership in the right direction in a constructive and fruitful manner. So I'm positive about it. It's not easy, but I think that's possible. And the three countries, together with China as well, have a very important role to play in that regard.
And if I could add on to that,
Julie,
Michael.
Julie. Yeah, please do.
If I could add on, I just want to address that the China issue that's come up. I mean, there is, we want to work with China, again, in this multilateral system. That's why the US rejoined WHO, HRC. We want to see WTO reform, as a previous speaker has talked about. We want to have a constructive, productive relationship with China. The United States has a massive trade and investment relationship with China, which will continue. The people-to-people connections, working on law enforcement, working on climate change, all those are critical areas. So I think the purpose of this trilateral, though, this JUSBE, is to reaffirm our shared values. And to be honest, there are some values that are not shared by China. We do not, for instance, want to aid and abet the Maduro regime's crushing of the Venezuelan people. China feels differently, and we want to make sure to support democracy in China. We also don't support putting 1.2 million Xinjiang Uyghurs in a detention center. China has been doing that. We also don't want to have illegal fishing where Chinese ships purposely turn off the radar system so that South American naval ships can't monitor and track where they're going. We also want to have intellectual property rights affirmed in WTO and other international fora. So again, this international system, the rules-based order, transparency, and accountability, those are the principles and values I think that Brazil, United States, and Japan really share, and we want to reaffirm. But by no means are we anti anything or anyone. We're really trying to coalesce around these shared values.
Thank you. Thank you, Julie. Anybody else would like to jump in? If not, why don't we move to the next question? And I think I'd like to direct this at least to Ambassador Donner. Did you want to say something on this?
Yes, Michael, I wanted to speak on that as well.
Okay,
just a comment here, if I can. Thank you, because it's a provocative question, and I think it deserves an answer also from my side here. I agree with Julie that we all have to engage with all actors in the international scenario. As for Brazil, China is a big country with whom we have enormous interest in our relationship. We have a mature relationship. It's more focused on, of course, trade and economics. We are seeing that even during the pandemics, our trade increased. The partnership is very much focused on that side. We do not share with China social or political models, organization of our society. Some values are very different, I agree. But the question was about how to engage with the WTO. And I would like to note that in the WTO, China and Brazil and Japan and the United States are, of course, big actors. It was highlighted before in this platform. And I would say that we can notice, if we go to the initial word, the initial speech that Dr. Ngozi, the new DG, gave when she took office at the WTO in her press conference. Of course, I wasn't there, but I looked into the press conference. And she mentioned a number of issues that were mentioned here today. She mentioned the need to work proactively on vaccines. She mentioned the need to talk about agriculture as one of the unfinished business. She didn't use this word, but she said we can work on agriculture under the development, on the development mandates, under the agriculture mandates that exist in the WTO. We can do that. She talked about the need to work on fisheries. She talked about the need to advance the issues of the future, such as e-commerce. So I see a notion of possibilities for all of us to engage in the WTO with the members. This is a member-driven organization, but Tatiana is right. We need a good DG to help the members, mainstream their various demands and into a consensual possibility for everybody to agree upon. Thank you, Michael, for this minute.
Sure. Thank you. Minister Hayashi.
Oh, yes, well, just very briefly, yes, I associate myself with Tatiana on the need of WTO reform. We would like to have a WTO more active and more useful to all member states. And if we mention two points in this context. First, with this corona crisis, we are faced with a risk on depending just one supply chain, one country to export your own product. We need really a multi-layered supply chain in that sense. And also some countries abuse this coronavirus to protect their own markets. So we need, it's a high time to activate the WTO. And secondly, I also I'd like to draw your attention also to the very forward-looking issue, which is the e-commerce or digital trade, which is really necessary under this corona pandemic, because as you know, the Japan-US concluded a digital trade agreement as well as the trading goods agreement. And so we are very in a position to promote the fair and the transparent rule to promote the digital commerce or e-commerce, which is really necessary under this pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't know, before we go to the next question, Ambassador Lago, did you want to say something on this question, or are you fine? Okay. Great. Let's go to the next question. I'm glad that a number of good questions are coming in. And one question is from Nabuki Hamaguchi, sorry. Is JUSBE going to be limited to intergovernmental cooperation scheme? Do we need to consider some non-governmental cooperation mechanism of dialogue involving private business, academia, non-governmental groups? What are the opinions of the experts on JUSBE and whether this will be another element within that framework? Who would like to start us off on that? Julie, did you want to?
Yeah, I'm happy to start. So as we just launched this just in November, it was launched as a government to government collaboration and discussion. But I think that absolutely we would welcome that, opening that aperture to have civil society, to have businesses, private sector, and others join in that collaboration, because that collaboration is already ongoing between the US, Japan, and the United States, and Brazil. So I think that's a natural fit. And especially on the private sector front, we already have great work in the Amazon. It's called a partnership platform for the Amazons, initiated by USAID, where we bring a collaborative group of private sector companies to look at sustainable development. Japan is doing the same. So in one concept, we're doing parallel programs. So now it's time to bring those three concepts together, and we have to bring in, it's almost a necessity, academia and entrepreneurs and others into that discussion. And I'll say another thing is looking at startups and entrepreneurship. That's where our three countries have great strengths. Even with the economy really being hit during the pandemic, there were over 400 startup projects that were started in Brazil, for instance, and unicorns have had record numbers of success, everything from health tech to fintech to ag tech that the Japanese speaker also spoke of. So I think it is a necessity that we will have to bring these other players and their voices into these discussions.
Thank you, Ambassador Donna Abreu.
Thank you, Michael. just to coincide with Julie, as we see it in Brazil, JUSBE will provide us with a big umbrella of ideas. The governments will provide the umbrella of ideas and initiatives, and other actors in the society would jump in and give their contribution, particularly the private sector. But I always think academia can bring the fresh ideas, can bring the provocative thoughts that would, and can bring effective conceptual inputs that can help us also explore new avenues or explore other ideas on how to do things. So we totally coincide with Julie and what she said. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Mr. Hayashi, do you have any thoughts on this, on the role of business groups and civil society in this within this framework?
Thank you. Well, I think, well, I totally agree with the Julie and the Marcia on the participation of the private sector in this trilateral forum. And I think, for example, this conference, this meeting is just an example how we can organize a trilateral dialogue, because physically or presentially it was very difficult to coordinate the three countries participants at the same time. But now through this online or virtual instrument, we can really realize our trilateral communication, not only among government, but also among private sectors or academia. Thank you.
Great, thank you. We have another question from Yoshiki Shimusu. Talks about that one of the areas that the Quad identified for cooperation was emerging technologies. We've mentioned here 5G, but the question is, what are there other areas in emerging technology that the three countries can collaborate on, and mentions whether AI is one field that's potential for collaboration. Anybody have any thoughts on other areas of technology? Mr. Hayashi? You had mentioned the 5G. Yes.
Well, thank you. 5G is well, it's a very hot topic and the current topic for the Brazilian government. So I just illustrated 5G issues as a good example. But of course, for example, in the ICT area, we have a number of corporations. For example, with Brazil, we introduced our common system in this digital television broadcasting system. And based on that, the history, we have quite a long-standing cooperation with Brazil and other Latin American countries in the ICT areas. And just I also raise another example, good example. We are helping Chile government to construct the fiber cable or optical cable between Chile and Australia, which will be a very important route to connect Asian countries for Latin America. So I think Brazil is also a good, can be a good participant in this big project to connect Latin America with Australia, or through Australia, Asia. And so in that sense, we are very looking forward to working with Brazil and other Latin American countries on this very flagship project. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you very much. Why don't we move to our next question? I believe this is for you, Mr. Nakamura, from our good friend Kazuku White. Asks, can the IDB consider an earmark assistance program for JUSBE, like it does with bilateral development agencies, such as the JBIC and JICA, as well as the Development Finance Corporation, Exim Bank, and others? Is this do you see this as a possibility?
Thank you very much. I think there's a possibility, for instance, the Amazon issue. As Ms. Chan mentioned about, U.S. private sector working with USAID to promote sustainable development. in Amazon area. And then recently IDB launched not only to cover Brazil, but also all the Amazon Basin initiative for sustainable development. And I heard that JICA is preparing a project to promote sustainable. They have been engaging, JICA has been engaging for years in Amazon sustainable development. So in this sense, we coordinate, and then IDB and USAID, for instance, and JICA, we can start kind of joint kind of program. So there's a possibility.
Great, thank you. This is a somewhat related country question to what you just asked, but somebody asked that many countries in Latin America are relatively high income countries. And how could they, or should they leverage their overseas development agencies in the region? USAID in the case of the United States, JICA, and others. What is the role for these development agencies? Anybody have any further thoughts on that question? Julie?
Yeah, so I think whether it's multilateral banks or any of our financing institutions, there's a lot of potential. And in fact, in the Indo-Pacific, we have seen this where formerly OPIC, which is now DFC, really partner with JBIC on the Japanese side to look at some joint financing projects together in Southeast Asia and Indo-Pacific. I think we can bring that same concept to the Western Hemisphere as well. We've had some initial discussions and this is where we see there's a potential with the DFC, and although they can't work in upper high income countries, they can work in middle income countries. And so we're exploring ways that we can really look at where can we bring value added together. We don't want to duplicate things. We don't want to do things when the other is already in that space, but where can we be complementary? And I think there's a lot of potential in working with JBIC and DFC and other actors, whether it's in Brazil or throughout Latin America and the Caribbean.
Great, thank you. Anybody else have want to add anything to this? Ambassador Dona? Please.
You can call me Marcia, but
Marcia, okay.
Listen, just to say to the other two, I very much appreciated the answers, and I do believe it's that we can join forces, and of course the big two providers of capital and even technology today, they can jump in the region. I see Julie speaking of the Indo-Pacific, and I believe we are very much in the same conjuncture. We have an area of the world here in the Western Hemisphere where we can explore possibilities of overcoming social and economic challenges. These are crucial to build democracy. Julie was the one who talked about that initially. Diminish inequality, promote prosperity are good avenues for promoting democracy, making people believe in the virtues and advantages of free markets, of good economic regulation, of good democratic regulation, rule of law. So yes, by all means, JICA, JETRO, IDB, Development Finance Corporation, whatever instruments are there, I think there's great potential, great advantage, and great need. See, we are going to rebuild, we are going to need to rebuild now. And this will be fundamental. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Hayashi. Did you want to add something?
Yes, thank you. Well, firstly, like the United States, we have also a different agency like JBIC, JICA, JETRO, and others. And as the participant mentioned, yes, in Latin America, generally speaking, we have more mid-income countries rather than LDC, low development countries. But using these different tools, we are providing more tailor-made and appropriate assistance to each Latin American country. This is the first point. The second point is we are also providing economic assistance to Latin American countries for more global perspective. That means not in order to overcome poverty or to meet the basic supply. But we are providing these assistance to, for example, to address climate change or COVID-19 propagation, such kind of things. And sometimes we don't give priority to income level of the target country, but we are looking at more how addressing the global issues with Latin American countries. So just I give you an example. For example, in Caribbean area, there are some very high income small countries, but and they are out of that list. But we are providing a technical assistance to them, taking into account, for example, vulnerability of small island states, which is quite fragile. For example, in case of the hurricane or natural disasters. Thank you.
Thank you. There's a question that's come in, and I want to see if Ambassador Lago or maybe somebody else would like to respond. It's a question about whether some analysts are talking about a less than fully robust relationship between the United States and Brazil in light of some differences and different emphases of the Brazilian government, the US government, and just any thoughts about to what extent that might affect the agenda of JUSBE and the areas for collaboration between the three countries, which is quite interesting. And there's a lot of areas that have been identified in this discussion. But are there concerns about the US-Brazil relationship moving forward in terms of differences in terms of deforestation and other differences? I don't know whether Ambassador Lago or somebody else would want to maybe take a crack at that. Ambassador?
No, I don't know if Massa wants to say something about it, okay. But I just want to mention that this is essentially an exercise of cooperation. And the scope of cooperation, as we have heard from all the participants, is so wide that definitely we have to concentrate on that. So I was very happy to hear, for instance, Mr. Nakamura mentioning the issue of ethanol. I think he pointed an extremely important opportunity. And I think that that's what the exercise is supposed to do, is that we find these points that will allow to have this wider cooperation between the countries.
Thank you. Thank you. Marcia, do you want to? I think you're on mute. Yes, please.
Thanks, Michael. And listen, for the first time here, I will read, because I have in front of me an interview that my minister gave yesterday. And one of the questions he was asked was precisely, how do you see difficulties in engaging with the United States now that there's a new administration? And what he says, I don't see any difficulty. Anything along these lines, it's so totally dissipated. And guys, I'm translating from a Brazilian newspaper. President Biden has took office. He is the president. We are working with him and all his team. We have all the conditions to produce positive results. We are seeing that getting already materialized, translated into practice. We are going to start talking about the commercial dimension. We'll soon have contact with the new USTR. We are planting pillars of what we are building with the US. These are permanent: defense of freedom, of democracy, closer economic relations. Of course, we have a huge power asymmetry, but the US see Brazil as a partner, a fundamental partner in many issues, among them climate, but not only climate. The good dialogue we are having in the climate and environmental dimension will also help us to expand our dialogue to other areas. He was obviously talking a bit about the climate change, but I think it says a lot. It's a comment that I can offer straight from my higher up. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Julie, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I'd just like to add, we talked a lot about climate change and clean energy. And of course, these are, topics that we're talking about again, and with more focus and prioritization in the United States, which affords us more opportunities to work with a wide swath of countries. But, you know, in every conversation that Secretary Blinken has had with his counterparts around the world, including with his Japan and Brazil counterparts, it was really a tone of welcome, you know, welcoming the US back into some of these multilateral institutions, willingness to work together, welcoming the US's voice on climate issues and many other issues that we may not have been at the forefront before. So I think in that tone and that aspect, we really see Brazil and Japan as partners to move together. You know, no two countries will agree on everything all the time, but we have so much of those shared values and those foundations that we really have a wonderful place to start off with. Again, that supersedes any leadership changes, administration changes. It's a sustainable relationship between our peoples amongst our three countries.
Great, thank you. We have another question from Wolf-Ciudad de Sosa. Whether any of the panelists see a potential of coordinating global challenges on humanitarian cooperation and also emergency responses in the developing world. Is this something that the trilateral cooperation could be useful in responding to? Any thoughts? Julie, you're nodding, so why don't we turn to you?
Yeah, absolutely. As referenced before on one of the major humanitarian crises of our generation in Venezuela, this again, we have regularly spoken with our Japanese and Brazilian counterparts and about the humanitarian assistance that we can do together, about calling Maduro out. And so that affects directly this region, and Japan has been such a strong voice on Venezuelan democracy as well. So, you know, the topic of Venezuela, we discussed that in our first initial JUSBE. And in terms of our the pillar of regional issues, of course, we can't ignore the impact of that on the humanitarian and democracy front. So I think this is another potential area where, again, those shared values of democracy and human rights and humanitarian assistance really converge. And Venezuela is one, but I think there are other areas that we can certainly discuss and it has a potential for in this forum.
Thank you. Marcia.
Again, to coincide, I think we are on the same page here. Julie, I could repeat your words. I do think that humanitarian engagement in Venezuela has been an example. We, at the Brazilian border, we have this big welcome operation. Japan and the US have cooperated with us strongly on that. I think we received or somehow helped more, almost 900,000 people, of which 260,000 strong or even more settled in Brazil. And this offers us a window of opportunity. In this region, we can identify perhaps other partners to work with trilaterally. In other regions, we could do the same. Why not in the Indo-Pacific? There is a region of interest for both Japan and the United States, and we are increasing our engagement with ASEAN partners. So the region is the natural candidate, the Western Hemisphere is the natural candidate for our trilateral humanitarian action, but there is a huge potential for that elsewhere as well. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you very much. Are there any other comments on this? Mr. Hashi, do you want to comment on this?
Oh, yes. Well, I'd like to follow the previous speakers on this issue. Yes, well, for example, in Venezuela, we have very close cooperation to help the refugees or the escaped people from Venezuela. And until now, for example, Japan provided more than $40 million assistance to these Venezuelans outside its country. And of course, we have a very close coordination with US and other allies on Venezuelan issues. And also, I'd like to call your attention on our trilateral cooperation in third countries. With the US, of course, in many countries we have that kind of cooperation, but with Brazil, for example, we have several projects in African Portuguese-speaking countries to help the normally poor people there and to meet their basic needs for their lives. So I think we have already several good examples of trilateral cooperation for humanitarian assistance or emergency assistance, and we are ready to develop this kind of cooperation with two partners. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We've come to the conclusion of our session. Before I turn it over to Ambassador Satoru for final remarks, I do want to thank everybody on behalf of the dialogue for this very rich and very informative and wide-ranging discussion on a very critical initiative, and which really, I think, underscores the real potential and opportunities for greater collaboration between Japan, Brazil, and the United States, and really thank our excellent speakers. But with that, I'd like to, it's a great privilege to turn the floor over to Ambassador Satoru Sato, who is the vice chair of JALAC and the former Japanese ambassador to Japan, to Brazil and to Spain, who will offer closing remarks on behalf of JALAC. Mr. Ambassador.
Thank you, Mr. Shifter. Before closing, let me say a few words on behalf of JALAC. First of all, I'd like to express our gratitude and satisfaction. We are delighted that today's meetings has turned out to be amazingly interesting and substantive, thanks to excellent speakers and panelists, as well as active participation of the audience and the able moderation of Mr. Michael Shifter. The outcomes have far exceeded our expectations. I would like to thank the organizers, the Inter-American Dialogue and CEBRI, for their valuable collaboration, in particular for the tireless work of coordination and technical support by Ms. Margaret Myers and her team. At the same time, we highly appreciate the proactive engagement with the most qualified high-ranking officials of the three countries, as well as the support of corporate sponsors. Without their backing, this seminar wouldn't have been successful. Listening to the discussions, I think all of us are impressed by huge potential of the Brazil, US, Japan trilateral cooperation. Priority areas of such cooperation are identified during the discussions. As the world confronts the COVID-19 pandemic, climate change, and other global challenges, the spirit of international cooperation is most needed now than ever. I hope our three countries will take the lead of international cooperation, strengthening the JUSBE framework as they seek peace and prosperity based on shared common values. In this regard, we look forward to having opportunities of further discussions on trilateral and inter-regional cooperation in the near future, in close coordination with Inter-American Dialogue and CEBRI. Finally, I thank again the speakers, panelists, audience, interpreters, and all the people involved for their contributions to make this seminar so successful. Thank you very much. Muito obrigado.